There once lived a young man named Joseph, the son of Jacob, a boy with a kind heart and a dreamer's soul. Joseph was different. Among his brothers, he was the youngest and, perhaps, the most loved by their father. Jacob had given him a very special gift, a beautiful coat of many colors, a coat that shimmered with every step Joseph took. But love sometimes creates jealousy. His brothers, they looked at Joseph and felt anger, bitterness, and something darker growing inside. One night, Joseph had a dream. He dreamed that he and his brothers were binding sheaves of grain in the field, and suddenly his sheaf stood upright while the sheaves of his brothers bowed down to his. He told them the dream, innocently, smiling, not knowing that with each word, their hatred grew stronger. And again, another dream, this time, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars all bowed down to him. Even Jacob, his father, was troubled by this dream. "What kind of dream is this, my son?" he asked. But in his heart, Jacob wondered if there was something divine in Joseph's visions. One day, Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers, who were tending the flocks far away. As Joseph approached them, smiling, innocent, wearing his colorful coat, the brothers plotted. "Here comes the dreamer," they whispered. "Let's kill him." One said, but Reuben, the eldest, spoke with caution. "Let's not shed blood. Let's throw him into this empty pit in the desert." And so they grabbed Joseph, tore off his beautiful coat, and threw him into the cold, dark pit. Joseph cried out, his voice echoing against the stone walls. But no one listened. Later, a caravan of merchants passed by on their way to Egypt, and the brothers, for 20 silver coins, sold their brother, their own flesh and blood. As a slave, they took his coat, soaked it in goat's blood, and brought it back to Jacob, telling him that a wild animal had killed his beloved son. Jacob tore his clothes, wept for days, and refused to be comforted. Joseph was now a slave in a foreign land, far from his family, far from home. He was sold to a man named Potiphar, a high-ranking officer in Pharaoh's army. But Joseph remained faithful, honest, and hardworking. And soon, Potiphar saw that everything Joseph touched prospered. Joseph was made the overseer of Potiphar's house. But there was danger that Joseph did not expect. Potiphar's wife watched him, desired him, and day after day, she tried to tempt him. But Joseph refused. He said, "How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" One day, when no one else was home, she grabbed him by his cloak, demanding that he lie with her. Joseph fled, leaving his cloak behind. But she, full of anger and shame, told her husband that Joseph had tried to attack her. And so, though innocent, Joseph was thrown into prison, dark, cold, alone, yet still, he did not lose his faith. Even in prison, God was with Joseph. The prison keeper noticed that Joseph was different, and soon Joseph was placed in charge of all the other prisoners. One night, 2 men who served Pharaoh were thrown into the same prison. The cupbearer and the baker both had troubling dreams, and Joseph, with God's guidance, interpreted them. To the cupbearer, Joseph said, "In 3 days you will be restored to your position serving Pharaoh." And to the baker, he said, "In 3 days you will be executed." And it happened just as Joseph had said. Before the cupbearer left, Joseph begged him, "When you stand before Pharaoh, please remember me and help me get out of this place." But days turned into months, and the cupbearer forgot. Joseph remained, waiting, hoping 2 years later, Pharaoh had a dream, a strange, disturbing dream. 7 fat cows, grazing by the Nile, swallowed by 7 thin, ugly cows. And then 7 full heads of grain were devoured by 7 thin, scorched heads. No one in Egypt could interpret Pharaoh's dream. And finally, the cupbearer remembered Joseph. Joseph was brought from prison, cleaned, dressed, and brought before Pharaoh. Pharaoh described his dreams, and Joseph calmly said, "God will give Pharaoh the answer." Joseph explained, "There will be 7 years of abundance, followed by 7 years of famine. So, prepare store food, or Egypt will starve." Pharaoh, amazed, appointed Joseph to be second only to him. Joseph, once a slave, once a prisoner, was now ruler of Egypt. When the famine came, it spread, not just in Egypt, but across all lands, and back in Canaan. Joseph's brothers had no food, so Jacob sent them to Egypt to buy grain. They stood before Joseph, not recognizing him. But Joseph recognized them. He tested them, watched them, and finally, when he could no longer hold back, he revealed himself. "I am Joseph," he said, tears streaming down his face. "Your brother whom you sold." The brothers trembled, afraid, but Joseph forgave them. He said, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good, to save many lives." Joseph brought his family to live in Egypt, and after many years, Jacob reunited with his lost son. There was joy, tears, and healing. And when Jacob's time came to pass, he blessed his sons, and Joseph remained faithful, taking care of his family until the end of his days. The story of Joseph is one of betrayal, pain, but also of faith, forgiveness, and the belief that even in the darkest moments, God is still at work. The story of Moses from the river to the Red Sea. There was once a boy, born in a time of fear, a time when the king of Egypt, Pharaoh, had ordered that every Hebrew baby boy be thrown into the Nile. His mother could not let that happen, so she wove a small basket, sealed it with tar and pitch, and placed her baby gently inside. With trembling hands, she set the basket afloat on the waters of the Nile, hoping, praying, that somehow God would protect her child. And the river carried him, past reeds, past fish, past dangers unseen, until the basket stopped near the palace of Pharaoh himself. There, Pharaoh's daughter found the crying baby. She felt compassion and decided to raise him as her own. She named him Moses, which means drawn out of the water. And so, the boy, who was born to be thrown away, was raised in the house of kings. Moses grew strong, educated, powerful, living among royalty. But in his heart, he always knew that he was Hebrew. One day, seeing an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave, Moses acted in anger and struck the Egyptian, killing him. Afraid, Moses fled into the desert. He wandered alone until he reached the land of Midian, where he became a shepherd. For years, Moses lived quietly, tending sheep under the hot desert sun, until one day he saw something strange. A bush, burning, but not consumed. As he approached, a voice called out, "Moses, Moses." Moses replied, "Here I am." And God said, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." And there, God gave Moses a mission. "Go, return to Egypt. Tell Pharaoh to let my people go." Moses, afraid, said, "Who am I to do this?" But God answered, "I will be with you." Moses returned to Egypt, with his brother, Aaron, by his side. They stood before Pharaoh, the most powerful man in the world. And Moses said, calmly but boldly, "Thus says the Lord, let my people go." But Pharaoh laughed. He refused. And so, God sent plagues upon Egypt. The river turned to blood. Frogs filled the land. Gnats, then flies. Disease struck the livestock. Boils on the skin. Hail fell from the sky. Locusts devoured the crops. Darkness covered the land. And finally, the last plague, the death of every firstborn. But the Hebrew people painted the blood of a lamb on their doorposts, and the angel of death passed over their homes, broken, grieving. Pharaoh called Moses and said, "Go, leave, take your people and go." And so, after 400 years of slavery, the Hebrew people were free. Moses led them out. Hundreds of thousands, men, women, children, walking, carrying their belongings, leaving Egypt behind. But Pharaoh changed his mind with his army. He chased them. Chariots, horses, soldiers. The Hebrews found themselves trapped between Pharaoh's army and the Red Sea. They cried out, terrified. But Moses stood before them, lifted his staff, and stretched out his hand over the water. And then, something incredible happened. The sea split, walls of water rose on each side, and a path appeared. The people walked through on dry ground. And when the last of them had crossed safely, Moses stretched out his hand again, and the waters closed. The Egyptian army was swept away. The people of Israel stood on the other side, safe, free, and they sang songs of praise and thanks to the God who had delivered them. From that day on, Moses led the people through the wilderness, through hunger and thirst, through doubt and fear, but always with faith. On Mount Sinai, God gave Moses the 10 Commandments, laws to guide the people toward a life of justice and peace. Though their journey was long and difficult, the story of Moses became a story of hope, of freedom, and of trust in something greater than fear. And even today, we remember that one man once stood before a king and with faith in his heart said, "Let my people go." The story of Moses, Part 2, the wilderness journey and God's provision. After escaping Egypt, after crossing the Red Sea, the people of Israel were free. But freedom did not mean the journey would be easy. Moses stood before them, guiding them, leading them through the vast, endless wilderness. The sun burned during the day. The nights were cold and silent. And as days turned into weeks, the people began to complain. They said, "Why did you bring us out of Egypt? Just to die here in the desert? There's no food, no water, no hope." Moses listened, and though his heart was heavy, he prayed, and God answered. Every morning, when the people woke up, they found the ground covered with something white and soft. It looked like frost, but when they touched it, it was like flakes, light, delicate, and when they tasted it, it was sweet, like honey. Moses said, "This is the bread that God has given you to eat." They called it manna. Each family gathered what they needed, enough for the day, no more, no less. And every day, the manna came, fresh, like a promise that they would not be forgotten. But still, as days grew hotter, the people grew thirsty. They found no water. And again, their voices rose in anger. "Have you brought us here to die of thirst?" Moses went alone to a quiet place and cried out to God, "What should I do with these people?" And God answered, Take your staff, go to the rock, and strike it. So Moses stood before the people, lifted his staff, and struck the rock, and from the dry cracked stone, water flowed, clear, cold, enough for all. The people drank, and their thirst was gone. As the days turned into months, and months into years, Moses continued to lead them, through dangers, through doubts, through moments of faith, and moments of fear. And each time, the people grew weary. God provided, with bread from heaven, water from the rocks, and shade from a cloud by day, and light from fire by night. Moses, with every step, taught them that even in the desert, even in the loneliest moments, God would never leave them. Their journey was far from over, but each sunrise and each sunset reminded them that they were led by a promise, a hope, and a God who heard every cry. The story of Moses, Part 3, the Mountain of Fire and the 10 Commandments. After many days and many nights, wandering through the endless golden desert, the people of Israel finally reached the base of a great and towering mountain. Its peak disappeared into the clouds. Its slopes were sharp, rocky, and cold winds blew from its heights. This was Mount Sinai. It was here that God would speak again. Moses was called to climb the mountain alone. The people stood at a distance, watching, waiting. And as Moses took his first steps upward, a strange silence filled the air. The sun began to hide behind clouds, and soon thunder rumbled from above. Lightning cracked across the sky, and the earth began to tremble. Moses climbed higher and higher, his feet slipping on loose stones, his hands gripping cold rocks, his heart both afraid and full of faith. For 6 days, he remained near the peak, covered by clouds, surrounded by darkness, with the voice of God speaking like thunder, echoing through the valleys below. And on the 7th day, God called to him. God's presence was like fire, like smoke, like a voice that filled the air, and yet spoke directly into Moses' heart. And there, on the mountain, God gave Moses 2 stone tablets. On them were written with the very finger of God the 10 Commandments, words that would guide the people, words that would teach right from wrong, words that would remain for generations to come. But down below, at the base of the mountain, something was happening. The people grew restless. Days had passed, and Moses had not returned. They began to whisper, to doubt, to fear, and then they made a terrible choice. They gathered gold from earrings and necklaces. They melted it and shaped it into the form of a golden calf. They danced, they sang, they celebrated, worshiping an idol, while the mountain above burned with the presence of God. God saw what they had done, and he said to Moses, "Go down, for your people have become corrupt." Moses, with the stone tablets in his hands, began his descent, his heart heavy with sadness and anger. And when he reached the camp and saw the golden calf, the people dancing around it, Moses fell to his knees. Then, with a cry, he lifted the tablets and threw them to the ground, shattering them into pieces. The people stopped. Their laughter turned to silence, their dancing to fear. They realized what they had done. Moses returned to the mountain once again, this time carrying 2 new stone tablets. And again, God spoke to him, patiently, lovingly, giving him the same commandments, writing them with his own hand. And when Moses finally returned to the people, there was something different about him. His face glowed with a light so bright that the people had to look away. For Moses had stood in the presence of the Almighty. From that day on, the tablets were placed inside a sacred ark, and the people began their journey once again, carrying with them not just food and water, but the law and the promise that they were not alone. And as the desert stretched out before them, they followed the cloud by day and the fire by night, knowing that even after mistakes, even after moments of weakness, God still walked with them. And Moses, their leader, their guide, continued to lead them step by step toward the land promised long ago.